Have you ever needed to bench bleed a master cylinder but you didn't know how? Well, stick around. I'm going to show you how to do it on your standard GM master cylinder. It's quick, easy, and painless. Keep on wrenching. So we've got the rear brakes on the car, and we've also got our new brake lines made. They go from the center of the rear end out to our new wheel cylinders. We're good all the way up to the master cylinder. So I've got this brand new master cylinder, and we need to bench bleed this. Now, if you don't know how to bench bleed a master cylinder, you're in luck, because I'm going to show you how to do that right now. Now, the idea behind that is to bleed all the air out of the actual cylinder inside the master cylinder before you hook your brake lines up, so that you have the minimum amount of air to push out from the very beginning of the system all the way out to the very end of the system. Now, your master cylinder, some master cylinders come with a pretty cheap kit. Others don't. You can buy them right off the shelf at your local parts store or wherever online. They're available. Or I've even made my own before, out of little chunks of brake line and whatever fittings you need to screw into your master cylinder. Now, this master cylinder, most of the kits also come with little plugs. So once we bleed all the air out of this master cylinder that we can get out of it, we're going to unscrew these as fast as we can, and we're going to screw these little plugs in here. Now, you're going to make a mess. You're going to get brake fluid on everything. I hate brake fluid on my hands. I just don't like brake fluid. I've got a little pan down here. I'm going to wear some rubber gloves when we get ready to do this. So these kits just come with different fittings. I've got a whole bag of them here that I've amassed over the years for different thread sizes, different master cylinders, whether they've got standard double flare fittings, or they've got bubble flare fittings, or whatever diameters they are. I mean, I've just got tons of these things in here. And your kit should come with all kinds of different adapters. Now, like I said, some master cylinders come with little kind of cheap plastic brake bleeder sets that are specifically for that master cylinder. And so over the years, I've just amassed a bunch of them. Now, you also get these little clips. I've got one right up here. And the way that works is you're just going to run your two little rubber hoses into there, and then you're going to clip it in the center of your dual reservoirs and run your hoses down. And you want them to be about that far from the bottom of your master cylinder chamber here. You don't want them up too high, because you never want these hoses to come out of your fluid at any point while you're bench bleeding. So you want to have them down as far as you can without them just being stuck on the bottom. That's no good. Now, I've got a couple of different styles of these clips that I've amassed over the years. This one kind of works the best because the hoses slide down through it. You can set it right in the center. Now, if I wanted to, I could put one over here on this side, and I could put one over here on this side and run my hoses independently. It just depends on what works best for you. You don't want to bump these while you're bleeding your master cylinder. You got a mess. So let me get these out of the way. I've got our plugs handy here, and you can also remove this wire if it's ever in your way. You just pull out, kind of slide it out of the way on GM master cylinders. Any manufacturer's master cylinders, those come right off. It's not in our way, but if it was, you could move it, or you could swing it to the other side. So basically, all we're going to do is we're going to fill this up with brake fluid as full as we can. We'll leave it down about that far just to keep from making a mess. Then we're going to take a Phillips screwdriver. I like the big fat ones because they fit in here without marring up the end of your master cylinder plunger. And then we're just going to push and let off, push and let off. And we're going to watch that fluid come out of here, and it's just going to put bubbles and bubbles and bubbles. And we're going to keep doing that, keep doing that, keep doing that. We're going to have to add a little bit of fluid just to keep that level up as it starts to push the air out of the cylinder. And we'll keep doing that until we pump this and there are no bubbles coming through these lines down into our fluid anymore. And then we'll have this bench blade. Then what we're going to do is we're just going to take these hoses off, and out of here we're going to put the lid on, close it, latch this, and that'll help put a vacuum on these hoses, so when we unplug these, a little less fluid is going to drip out. And then I like to hold the hose up in the air, unscrew these as fast as I can, have my plug ready, and run her in there. So I'll stop yakking. Just wanted to explain the whole process to you guys. Also, your master cylinders usually they have these little plugs in these holes. You just pop them out. Like these are just little rubber plugs that pop in and out. But they're not tight enough to use. After you bench bleed, you want to really use these. And then this can sit here on the bench until we get the old master cylinder off, and then we'll just bolt it right on. Then we'll just pull these plugs out, screw our lines in as fast as we can. Again, it's not going to pull air in as it's running out. The only air you're going to have to purge out from the beginning of the system basically is going to be whatever's in the top of your brake line, because your master cylinder isn't going to have any air in it. And you're going to want to make sure that you don't let this thing run dry as you're pushing air down through your lines. But let me get some brake fluid in here and we'll get right at it. Now you can see some bubbles are just already working their way out. And that's good. We can just let that sit for a second. Grab my gloves. Move some more stuff out of the way. So hopefully you guys can see that. It's pretty good. So now all we're going to do is we're going to push this plunger in, simulating being in the car pushing on the brake pedal. And we're going to do that nice and slow. If you do it fast, it'll spray fluid everywhere. We're going to go nice and slow, and then we'll slowly watch these bubbles kind of work themselves out. It's going to work the air right out of the line. And these can be tricky to press on. Once you figure it out, I see it push the air out, and then it sucks fluid right back in. Now it's purging a bunch more air. There's some more bubbles coming out. Now you can see this fluid level has dropped substantially. It's still not below our hoses, so we're okay, but we're just going to keep an eye on that, because there it purged a bunch more air out at the bottom of the cylinder. Now the back reservoir is getting it. There we go. Now this one up here, the big reservoir is your front brakes, because they do a large majority of your stopping, and then the rear reservoir is your back brakes. So there we're purging out some more air. You don't want to rush this. Just take your time. It takes a little bit of time, and you're going to get annoyed because you're going to be like, this should be done already. You want all the air out you can get out. Every time I push on this, there's air coming out. You can see those bubbles traveling down that hose. Now it's going to suck them right back in. So again, we got to get those out of there. The only way we're going to be able to do that is just keep pumping this thing until we get no more air bubbles. Getting better. There's a bunch more air. There's a bunch more air. There's a lot more air in there than you would think there should be. Be patient. Keep on pumping. Now, if you do have somebody helping you, you could bolt your master cylinder onto the car and do this with it on the car. You're just going to need somebody in there pumping that pedal and somebody out watching the air bubbles so that you know when it's good enough. All the air is gone. That's really hard to do by yourself with the master cylinder on the car. That's why in the vise is the best way to do it when you're running the one-man show. Okay, we're gonna let that sit for a minute. Mostly because my arm's tired. We've got quite a bit of air out of this. There's still a lot to go. This takes a lot longer than you think it should. We'll add just a little more fluid to this. There, I'm making a mess already. I don't know why I can pour antifreeze, I can pour oil, I can pour anything I want, but I go to pour brake fluid and instantly, all over everything. Eating the paint off everything, it's just a nightmare. Probably because I don't like brake fluid. Okay, we're going to keep on pumping. Some more air. The front's looking pretty good, but it just keeps pumping out more and more air, if you see that. Every time I push, a little more air. The back still has a ton of air in it. Every time I push, more bubbles come out. This is why they recommend that you bench bleed. Because if you just put this thing on the car and tried to bleed this air out through the wheel cylinders or your calipers, you would go, oh, I got all the air out. And then your pedal would be soft forever because all this air is still stuck in there. And you would waste so much fluid. Front's looking really good now. Back's still got a ways to go. Still got some little bubbles in there. They're working their way out. Oh, there's a couple more bubbles in the front. Now you can see when I push a little harder, you can see the fluid kind of shoot up out of there. That's why you want to be careful. You don't want to push too hard, or squirts out of there and makes a giant mess. But you want to push hard enough that you get that air to get through that hose and down into the fluid, because that allows it to raise up and get it out of the system. We've almost got this whipped. There's just a slight little bit of tiny bubbles in this rear reservoir. Just working them out a little at a time. You also want to make sure that your master cylinder is somewhat level. Because if you have it at a real wicked angle, an air bubble could sit in that master cylinder somewhere and you could not get it purged out. It's like there's an air bubble in the front about to pop up through. There. It's like there's another one in there. Pop out of there. Come on, baby. Pop out of there. There it goes. Boop. There's another bubble. There's one more in there. Off it went. There, came out a whole bunch. There's a bunch out of that front reservoir. There, I'm getting a bunch out of the back too. I'm not making full strokes. I'm just going just a little bit at a time. One other little word of advice too. You can suck air through your fittings if these fittings aren't tight enough in here. When you let off, it can actually, instead of pulling fluid through here, it can actually pull air in. Now, ours aren't leaking at all, so I don't think I have any of those issues. But if you're leaking around your fittings there, you want to make sure that you're not leaking around those fittings at all. Okay, I think we're pretty good. I think we're pretty good, guys. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set my cover over top of this just to kind of protect it from dirt and stuff falling down in there and to keep our hoses from flopping out. And I'm going to let that sit for a little bit and go pull the master cylinder off of the car and get the car ready for this master cylinder. And then we'll come back, we'll pump it a couple more times just to make sure that any air that's risen up in there or anything like that, we've really got all the air out of this master cylinder. Then we'll put the top on, we'll put the plugs in it, we'll go toss this thing on the car. So let's move over there and get working on that master cylinder. So we're in the front of the car here. Lucky for me, I've already got the rear brake plugged off for this rear reservoir for the rear brakes because we had the rear brakes completely deleted off the car. So we've only got this front line to loosen and take off. And then we've got a bolt on this side and a bolt on the other side, and this master cylinder should come right off. Now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna use this plug for the new master cylinder. And when I pull this fitting out, I'm going to screw this plug in there and hopefully not make a ginormous mess of brake fluid everywhere. Then we can pull these other two bolts and slide this baby off, and then I can go dump this brake fluid in my waste barrel. Now, one thing that is very, very, very important to remember, brake fluid will eat the paint off your car. So if you go swinging this thing over your fender or lay it on your hood or your roof or something, just remember, the next day, you ain't going to have no paint left. So try not to get it all over your gloves and then touch your paint or anything like that, because it will eat your paint. This is in pretty good shape, so my lines come loose pretty good. Of course, I've already been here before when we were working on the front brakes. I hope this fitting just screws right in there. There we go. Snug it up just a little bit. I've already broke these bolts loose back here, but on this, just a couple 9/16 bolts. So Ford, Dodge, Chrysler, Pontiac, old, it's all the same concept, just different size bolts, different size fittings. Now, if you don't have one of these, this is your brake booster. This is what gives you power brakes. It runs off vacuum off of your intake. Some run off electricity on newer stuff, and some are even hydro boost that run directly off of your power steering pump on big trucks and stuff like that. If you don't have one of these at all and your master cylinder bolts right to your firewall, or it's underneath your floor, then you're working on something real old and probably way cooler than this Buick. But anyway, then you have manual brakes. Also on the super old stuff, you may only have one line coming out, which means you have a single reservoir master cylinder. Now, if you have one of those and you're not trying to stay 100% original, I recommend you figure out what other people have figured out works to convert it over to dual reservoir, because they're so much safer. That's the only reason we're putting this on, a new master cylinder on this car and running rear brakes, is just so that if the front brakes fail, we have the backup rear brakes to at least slow us down while we pick a parking lot to hit or a sidewalk to run over. With a single line, single reservoir master cylinder, if one line gets a hole in it, you have zero brakes. And that is not a good feeling, let me tell you. Okay, so we got our bolts here. I should be able to just slide this right off here, right like so. And that's why our brakes have been causing us a bunch of havoc. You can see there's brake fluid down here, which means the seal and inside the master cylinder that seals the brake fluid from the brake booster and, you know, your brake pedal push rod has gone bad. And so when I push on the brakes, it's hard to build pressure because it's losing that pressure into the master cylinder brake booster area. Typical master cylinder failure. Not a big deal, just, you know, it is what it is. The typical telltale sign is how I kind of assumed that that was the issue, is it started leaving a wet spot on the bottom of my brake booster here, and then I knew that my master cylinder was probably shot. So anyway, I'm going to go dump this fluid before we make a big mess on accident. We'll clean this up just a smidge, and then we'll be ready to bolt that new one on there. Alright guys, now if this was a car that we really cared about, we were restoring it or anything, now would be the time to clean this all up with the wire brush on the end of your drill or your die grinder or whatever. And then you could spray bomb this thing black or gold or whatever color it's supposed to be or whatever color you want it to be. Up to you. One thing I do recommend is anytime you work on this stuff, you always want to pull this rubber grommet out of here and check it. Make sure it's really nice and rubbery. This one's new. I put this on when we were working on the engine, so I know this is a new rubber seal and it's not going to leak any vacuum because this vacuum line runs directly off your engine, and that's what creates the power for your power brakes. Now, I've also pulled out this rubber bushing that goes down inside here. I've cleaned it all up. That's where that was all leaking, and that seals the vacuum in the bottom part. When you push on the brake pedal, this rubber plunger, watch this. Brake pedal out. This rubber bushing rubs right on the inside of here and seals. So the other thing I've done is I got a magical helper in the car, push the pedal out for me so that I could clean this off really well. So I've got that all cleaned up really good. Now, little redneck trick, I guess. What I'm going to do when I go to put this back together is I'm just going to take a smidge of Permatex and just put it right around the outside edge of this seal. And then I'm going to pop it in there, and I'm going to take just a little bit of like WD-40 and or any lubricating oil, a little bit of lithium grease or silicone or something, and just put on the inside of this right in here so that it slides and seals up really nice against that. And then that Permatex will help with any imperfections in here because I cleaned this up in here the best I could, but there's still some pitting and some gross stuff going on there. And, you know, any vacuum leaks are going to, cause your engine to run rough. And it's also, because this is your brake booster, it's going to affect your brakes as well. So I'm going to pop that in there, and then I've cleaned this up really good, so this will get a nice, tight, good seal there as well. Now, if this was all rotted out or real rough around the edge of here, you could do the same there. You could put just a little bit of Permatex or something on there and then pop that baby in there, and then it's just going to seal up really good. You just don't want to use it on here where this pops in because you want to be able to remove this later, and you can put a little bit of oil on that if you wanted to, just to make it easier to push in there and to help seal that up really good. So we're going to go ahead and do that. And I also cleaned up the ends of our threads here on our fittings. So we should be able to double check that master cylinder like we talked about before and slap that baby in here. Okay, so I put just a little bit of Permatex around here like we talked about. I'm just going to smooth it out. Doesn't take much, just a little bit. that. And I've already had my helper push out the pedal, and we squirted a little bit of WD-40 on there. So, helper, you want to push the pedal in again? So now all we got to do is pop this right over here. And we can slide this right down in. Okay, let off. Okay, push on the pedal again. Let off. Not bad at all. All right, push it in. There we go, let off. Okay, so now we have a little WD-40 on there. So that should stay nice and lubed up. Like the extra out of there. Perfect. Now we got to put this little seal on here. We're going to do the same thing with a little WD-40 just on the back side, just to help kind of pop it in there. Okay, that one's popped in. I do the same here. And you just pop this baby in, like so. Now we got a nice good seal. Now we'll go grab our master cylinder. Alright, so we've got the car all cleaned up and ready for this new master cylinder. And I just took the cover back off of it. We're going to double check it, make sure we got all the air out of there that we can get out. Now let it sat for about 15 or 20 minutes, and then we will slap this baby on the car. There's a couple little baby bubbles. It's looking pretty good. Oh yeah, baby's ready. Go right on the car. No air bubbles whatsoever. Oh, there was one on the back side. Yeah, we're good to go. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to remove these lines. I'm going to put the lid back on it, snap the lid shut, and then we're going to pull these fittings out and put our plugs in. When you pull these out, you want to make sure you keep your hoses up higher than your master cylinder. That fluid is going to try and drop down to the level at the top of the master cylinder, but it can't go too far. We're going to pop that on. It's kind of tricky with one hand, but it's doable. Boom. That's snapped on. So now we just need to unscrew this one and screw our fitting in. I have our fitting right here. I want to do this as fast as possible. So I make as little of a mess as possible. There we go. Snug this up a little bit. Oh, come on. Doesn't want to fit. This one fits. You don't want to over tighten these because they just got plastic threads. So snug them up good. There, we got one in a giant mass. I'm just going to drop this down here in my little pan. Rah! That one's snugged up a little bit. Get that down in there. Not sure if that's 9/16 also. Yep. Okay, so we got that snugged up. Remember, power steering fluid. Now remember, brake fluid will eat the paint off your car. So if you carry this thing dripping and dropping all over your paint or your fender, even one little drop, it's going to start eating your clear coat. It's going to eat your paint. It's gonna screw stuff up. If you spray painted the inside of your fender wells or something to make the engine bay look cool, or like I mentioned earlier, if you cleaned up your brake booster and painted it all nice and shiny, and then you'd go dripping a bunch of this brake fluid on it, you're gonna be awful grumpy tomorrow because you're gonna be redoing a bunch of stuff and trying to clean all that brake fluid off of there so that the new paint will stick for your second try. So just be forewarned. Do not carry this thing dripping and dropping and making a giant mess over there. Now we're just gonna loosen this. Just gonna wipe off the bottom of it. A little bit here. Let that sit, and I'll get you guys spun around and we'll toss this on the car. Alright guys, so I'm just gonna set this right down on here. It's gonna go right up against our seal. Start putting our nuts on. Now, one little trick that I have learned over the years is if you take aluminum foil, let's say you had this all painted down in here like we were previously talking about. You can take aluminum foil straight out of your kitchen. You can wrap it around your lines going down past your fittings, and you can stick it all down in here and kind of make like a little catch pan. Now you don't want that to fill up with brake fluid, but you just want it to catch any drips or drops. So you can put that down in there and kind of make yourself a little catch pan down there. And then I like to take a couple of rags, just throwaway rags, and set them down in there. That way the rags catch the drips and the aluminum foil is like your backup. And then once you get everything done, you can very, very carefully remove all that stuff. Another thing you want to be kind of cautious of is the master cylinder is the correct one for your car and your brake booster. Now they make some universal push rods for your brake pedal that are adjustable for like street rods and rat rods and hot rods and all that stuff. Or let's say you're going from a single reservoir to a dual reservoir and you need to adjust that length. If your bar is too short, when you push on the pedal, you're not going to get full engagement of your master cylinder. And if it's too long, then your brakes are going to be always partially depressed. Even if you bleed them and stuff and it seems to work okay, if you have to slam on the brakes, you're not going to get all of your brakes. Now, if you push on the pedal and you feel like 1.5 inches or 2 inches of play before it even gets to the master cylinder, you'll feel it. It's funky. Then that shaft is either the wrong length or you have the wrong master cylinder. There's a lot that goes into all that. Like I said, they make some adjustable rods that you can use for custom applications, things like that. You don't have to worry about that though too much as long as you're just doing a standard replacement like we're doing here. Snug this baby up good. Perfect. Now for the messy part. We're going to pull these out one at a time and just thread them in there. This one up here turns real easy. The one in the back is a little more crusty. It still turns good, but it's a little more crusty. So what we're going to do is we're just going to stick this rag under here. Try and do this as fast as we can. started. Don't get in a hurry and cross thread these or you'll be grumpy. It should go right in. There we go. That one's good. Very minimal spillage. And I'll go put this plug with the rest of my stuff. Grab us another less gross rag here. We'll work on the back one. Hopefully I'm not blocking you guys too much. I think it started. Like I said, this one, nope, doesn't like to turn as easy. And when I put our plug in there, there it goes. I bent the line back just a little bit so it was kind of out of the way. Oops. There we go. Now all we have to do is bleed the brakes, front and rear. Now we already had brake fluid in the front brakes because the front brakes on this car were hooked up, so that shouldn't be very difficult. All we really got to do is get whatever air is right in here from us unhooking this line. We just got to purge that out, and you always want to bleed both sides. Don't just do one side and go, there's all the air. Bleed both sides. Don't try and cut corners. And then the back, we're going to have to really keep an eye on the back because that's all brand new lines. This has been unhooked, so this is going to have air in it all the way to the back to our wheel cylinders because all those lines are brand new. So I'm going to go get a helper. I don't know who, but I'm going to go find a helper to pump the brakes for me and get this ready to bleed the brakes. It shouldn't take us too long. Alright guys, so Matt and I just got done bleeding the brakes after we put that master cylinder on there and got our other brake work done. I got another video on that shows you how to bleed brakes if you don't know how to do that or you just want to watch us kind of fumble through it. I also install line lock on the car in that video, so make sure you go and check those out. And yeah, Matt and I are just cruising around town having a good time, enjoying the Buick because it's always a good time, turns heads, and yeah. You don't have to spend $1 billion to have a good time, so. Anyway, guys, until next time, keep on wrenching. Peace!